It's my privilege once again to welcome each one of you for our Zoom meeting to study the Word of God, to seek Him every day at the beginning of our activities for today, to seek God for His guidance and instruction so that our lives can be in accordance with God's Word, His instructions for us. Our loving God who knows each one of us, who sees beyond what we can to warn us and to prepare us for what is to come ahead of us in life. For God gives us instructions that we should follow in our lives so that we can be successful and victorious Christians, sharing God's love and His message to people around us. Today we will look at another very important aspect of life and how we should deal with situations which are sometimes hard, which are sometimes a little tricky, but with God's guidance, we can make it. Life on this earth, as we know, cannot continue without relationships because we interact with people at different levels, be it in our home, in our society, in our church, in our workplace, wherever we may be, we interact with people. We enter into relationships. But living in a sinful world, you cannot be assured that you will face no problems. However good you think you may be, however faithful you are serving God, there is the enemy who is always waiting to bring trouble to you, to bring you into hard situations, and probably try his best to divert us from our walk with God. Today we will study in chapter 25, verses 8 to 10. Proverbs chapter 25, verses 8 to 10. Reading the word. Do not go hastily to court, for what will you do in the end? When your neighbor has put you to shame, debate your case with your neighbor, and do not disclose the secret to another, lest he who hears it exposes your shame and your reputation be ruined. In our relationships, in our interactions with our fellow human beings, there can always be the possibility of misunderstanding. Every human being has their own perspectives in understanding life, in viewing others and interacting with others. When there is a clash of values, of standards, our interactions can face rough weather. That is when problems rise. And unless we deal with our situations and problems in a Christ-like manner, we can always head to disputes that can lead to even serious situations. And so in such situations, we have once again here the wise man giving us and continuing this list of do not admonitions. And this is telling us directly a situational context. And that is, do not go hastily to court. Just as much as we have courts in session and operation at the present time, even over 3,000 years ago, in the days of Solomon and even before that, we have this judiciary system where courts were established to have judges who would bring a case between two parties, evaluate their situations and their reasons, and thus make an appropriate judgment. But the admonition given in this first instance is that we should not be hasty. It is very interesting to note people from different places, the way how they relate to life. If you see people who are living up in the hills, their life requires them to patiently walk up a hill, and you know how difficult that can be, a very slow, gradual, steady process. And you progress gradually, and then likewise coming down maybe a bit faster, but unless you're cautious. So when you see people who live in such hill countries are always a little slow, they are more thoughtful, and they take things rather easy. But you look at a person who lives in the plains, they're very quick. They have no obstacles as such. If they are either walking or driving, they like to go fast. They think quickly. They want to act hastily too. They have no patience because they can see things happening quickly. They are moving things faster, and so they also want to do things hastily. And if there's one place that anyone should ever avoid, even the present society or back then, is a court of law. Courts are established to settle disputes. When two parties do not agree, do not solve and settle matters between themselves, they go to court. And God even himself established when the children of Israel were facing situations of differences, misunderstandings, needed judgments to settle cases, God established. And of course, Moses was doing it, and later Moses appointed judges at different levels to take care, thus simplifying his work. But going to court is perhaps the last resort. And going to a court should never be a decision taken in haste. The law of court of law may be necessary, but that should never be a decision made in haste. The option is that if possible, we should resolve a dispute in any other way. If there is a possibility, probe and use that method so that you can bring about peace and harmony, and not to hastily run to a court. We know how going to a court would mean spending a lot of money. You have to hire a lawyer who will speak on your behalf, but that costs much. Likewise, the other one who is accused, he will also have his lawyer, and he is spending money. And so, in settling a situation or a problem, we have to invest money in people. And these people are highly educated and in the law, of course, and their services are demanding, cost money. And then you have to go to the judge, But remember, in all of this, these people who are meting out judgments are also human beings. And so, instead of going through this final option, we should try our best to somehow settle a situation or a problem even outside of the law. And many times I've heard people saying, even in the court of law, the suggestion would be given even by the judge, make settlements outside the court. That is always more amicable, in a friendly manner. For in a court, the judge will make his decision upon the information that he has, and with sometimes incomplete information as well, details not secured, there can be misjudgment, and you cannot do anything about it. But here, if you are able to settle your problems outside, certainly you will not need to face that embarrassing situation with your neighbor. When you go to the court, you will have to give all the details, and your problem many times is even more complicated with the details. And those details may even put you to shame. And if you received the verdict against you, you are certainly embarrassed, because the court is a public situation. People are there to listen. People will come to know everything about you. And what respect and honor will you have when you yourself drag somebody to court, and when your secrets and the other person's secrets are all laid open before people? And imagine what can happen to one's reputation. So Solomon's wise advice: debate your case with your neighbor. Though somebody has offended you, it is always good to reconcile between you before it gets more intensified, when others add things which probably were not in your purview. People will bring in other things, other situations, other details, and make the situation more complex. But if you can go to your neighbor, or the one who has wronged you or you are accusing of, you can talk together. You can discuss. You can keep your secrets and not expose them to your shame, and that your reputation would not be ruined, but settle things amicably in a friendly manner. That is how a relationship is mended. But when a judge makes a decision, this decision may be in favor of one and against another, and from then and ever on, those two parties will be at enmity with each other. Judgment may be right or maybe sometimes wrong. But what happens? The two parties who are aggrieved, they will remain enemies. These aggrieved parties may never come together, but a good compromise, a good understanding, a little give and take from either sides will help to solve a situation. Certainly, settling matters in a spirit of love and respect will certainly go a long way to settle a matter and to mend relationships. And the outcome certainly would be relationships restored. And so Solomon, in giving us wisdom on how to handle conflicts, is advising against rushing into legal action or a public dispute which is challenged, it is heard by everybody. But instead, if you can calmly talk and debate about issues privately with your neighbor and not disclosing unnecessary secrets to prevent public shame or ruin, and further only could cause strife and animosity between the two groups. But in order to preserve your honor and peace, avoid public confrontation. And this principle we see echoed much even in the New Testament. We have the counsel from Jesus, we have from Paul, and these do tell us how we as God's people, as His children, the way how we should relate to one another, especially when we have such situations. In Matthew chapter 18, verse 15 to 20, Jesus is instructing us. Verse 15, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. So you see, Jesus is telling us to maintain secrecy, but sin and a wrong cannot be simply covered. It has to be discussed, and it has to be secretly, amicably settled between the two parties. Go to him alone. It's always good to deal with things between the one who has wronged you. But most often, instead of seeing the person whom you want to accuse, you tell about the problem to many more others than meeting the person who you should privately, alone, and settle the problem with us, between us and the other person. Then certainly you would have made a friend of even one who has wronged you. And Jesus said, look, if that attempt to meet a person individually fails, verse 16, but if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, and every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. Moses gave to the children of Israel this practice, that if somebody should be convicted, there should be 2 or 3 witnesses. For if any 2 would connive, there would be a 3rd witness. Unless the 3 agree, a punishment would not be meted out. And therefore, Jesus says, look, take 2 or 3, those who could, talk to the one who is accused, who has wronged you, and give him understanding. And with evidence of 2 or 3, the mistake could be recognized and identified. But verse 17, if he refuses to listen to you, then tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile. The first step is you meet with him individually and personally and settle between you. If not, if he's not listening to you, take 1 or 2 elders or those who are witnesses to the situation and show the weight of evidence. And even if still that person does not choose to agree, to compromise, or to settle, then says treat him as a Gentile or somebody who now does not want to compromise with you, then you can take him to the court. This is, I suppose, a very good, progressive attempts to win back somebody, to compromise with somebody, and to restore relationships. In giving this wonderful instruction, Jesus desired that there should be a resolution to problems and not a complication to problems. Compromise, which means one's willingness to come down and one's extension of forgiveness to the other. You should be willing to give and take. And it calls for a lot of humility, of course, if we want to practice such a situation. Certainly, it is always best to resolve in most privacy rather than avoiding false impressions and embarrassments when you're taken maybe to a court of law. If a person is not able to see the real situation, certainly those of experience can help the person to know and convince him of his fault. But a judge too will make efforts. But finally, if the person is not willing to accept, a judge is the one who will make a decision. And that would be certainly humiliating, embarrassing. And you know, in the court, there are arguments, counter arguments, evaluating details, validating information. All this probably may not be the end of the situation. And so in our present situation, maybe from a district court, they may apply to the high court, and from the high court, you can go to the Supreme Court, or maybe even to International Court of Law. There are various levels of where judgment can be either challenged or restored. But instead, going through all of those, the best advice that is given even by the wise man is to settle problems within our own individual, private endeavors so that there could be secrecy maintained, that you're not putting anybody to shame and humiliation, but there is a restoration of a good relationships. James, Apostle James, who talks much about practical things, tells us, chapter 1, verse 19, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And I think this is a very important verse that Apostle James is giving to us in our relationships with one another, to avoid problems that erupt even among best of friends. In chapter 4, verse 1, James again says, what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? James is identifying, yes, within you, your emotions are at work. And many times, when these emotions are not put under control and harnessed, your emotions will spurt, and then you have problems that are created by such emotional outbursts. And then you drag a person into the court, and where you have spoken or acted emotionally, eventually losing your temper and so on, you will have to face a severe consequence. And so it is always best to settle with your neighbor in good spirit. Most often, both sides feel that they are on the right side and the opponent is on the wrong side. That is how most of us think and we behave. But then we do not realize how, in our emotional instability, we have acted many times unintelligently, without wisdom, and without restraint. And we can virtually do nothing once you have lost, you have spoken words, you have acted disgracefully. But Paul, writing to the Colossians in chapter 3, verse 13, Colossians 3:13, he says, bearing with one another. And if one has a complaint against another, forgive each other, and the Lord has forgiven you, so you must also forgive. The Christian way is not to seek for revenge, is not to feel happy at the suffering of somebody or another of other you're accused receiving punishment, but rather you should be bearing one another's burdens, forgiving each other. So human for us. In rubbing shoulders with one another, we will hurt somebody, we will wrongfully misunderstand people. There is wrongs that we do against each other, but a good Christian is one who is always willing to forgive, because the Lord himself has shown us the example. Even on the cross, Jesus, who was so badly treated during his trial, on the cross, Jesus prayed for those who have mistreated him. And he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Jesus was willing even to forgive those who have done against him. What would we do normally expect? The one who has wronged us to come to us and seek for forgiveness. But Jesus goes, what we say, the second mile, the extra mile. He knew very well that he was going to die. And these people who have wronged him, even if they should realize later, they would have no opportunity to seek forgiveness in person. And so Jesus already prayed to his Father to forgive them. Jesus' willingness to forgive is the pattern for us. Willing to step down, willing to accept humility. As Jesus said, if somebody slaps you on the right side, show him the left side. Any sensible person, if he has done wrongly, will realize when you show him the other cheek. Even your tormentors may be brought to their senses. The way how we as Christians are called upon to act, called upon to relate to one another, to act in the manner that Jesus has showed them an example. Certainly we have Jesus and the apostles through their counsels to us and the wise counsel from Solomon, showing us the way that we ought to go. For in the commandments, Jesus, through Moses, told the children of Israel not to bear false witness against your neighbor. Instead, to love your neighbor as yourself. You see the way that we as Christians ought to walk. We are not going out there to demand justice and to be treated honorably because we are right, but because as Christians, we should be willing to forgive even those who have wronged us, to love them. And when you love even your enemy, you would have no enemies at all. This is a great example that Jesus had shown us. And so why go to a court of law for justice, but rather we should be willing to make right with one another. We should be willing to accept each other as children of God, settle things amicably, and you can see how wonderfully these would help us in restoring our relationships with one another, and how we can represent to the world the way Jesus has lived and how he wanted us to be his wonderful example to the world, showing the world his love, his willingness to forgive, to consider others before you, and in settling problems, do it in calmness, settle things in private so that others would not need to know secrets that may embarrass us, and let wisdom be what would guide us, and not haste, not impulsion, not emotional reactions, but thoughtful and patient dealings with our fellow human beings, loving them as children of God. This manner of resolving our conflicts would certainly avoid problems, enmity, continued rivalry, but rather make us loving and lovable Christians. May God bless each one of us today as we, in our interactions, in our relationships with our fellow human beings, when we should enter into problems, let us show the Spirit of Christ, who would rather settle things in private than go to an unbeliever who would not even consider your faith in giving you judgment. May God bless each one of us to then. This end is my prayer for you, and have a blessed day.